tipping point for climate change is almost upon us. How much carbon did humanity emit so far? And how much we left with before crossing the 2 degrees Celsius threshold? Is it possible to cut carbon emissions altogether? Why the ongoing global scenario shows no sign of containing the increasing temperatures? Given its own set of developmental priorities, can India cut the rate of carbon emissions? GS Paper 3, Environmental Impact Assessment, Climate Change. What is the context about? Up until now, the conversation on the issue of climate change has almost always been hopeful. In various rounds of international negotiations, we have looked into the future and said that if we cap global carbon emissions, we will be able to stall temperature increases. But now President-elect Donald Trump's ascent to the White House is going to change things. Given the power of the office he will assume in January, the Let's Solve Climate Change momentum will tip off at worst, or be halted at best. How much carbon did humanity emit so far? And how much we left with before crossing the 2 degrees Celsius threshold? Carbon budget contains the total amount of carbon, 700 to 860 billion tons to be precise, that can be released into the atmosphere without increasing temperatures by more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Of the total carbon budget, humanity has so far emitted 550 billion tons since the onset of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Which means we have only another 150 to 300 billion tons of carbon left to emit before we are likely to cross the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. For perspective, by 2014, the world was blowing through a net of 10 billion tons of carbon from the budget annually, giving us 15-30 years before we cross the point of no return. Is it possible to cut carbon emissions altogether? Over 90% of carbon emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels, production of cement, and the burning of oil and gas in industrial plants. As our civilization is locked into these base systems for its energy and power needs, we cannot simply turn off a switch and stop emissions altogether. But there is a strong need to phase out our dependence on these systems with cleaner alternatives, and hope that we can do it fast enough, so as to leave some safety buffer in the carbon budget. Why the ongoing global scenario shows no sign of containing the increasing temperatures? China, US, EU, and India accounted for half of the world's 10 billion tons of net annual carbon emissions in 2014. In order for us to make much needed progress, this number needs to come down as soon as possible. However, in November 2014, China announced that its carbon emissions would continue to rise through 2030 and would level off only after around then. Given Trump's proposed scrapping of the coal power plant phase-out program and push for increased production of fossil fuels, US emissions are only going to head north. Given its own set of developmental priorities, can India cut the rate of carbon emissions? Obviously no. India currently accounts for 10% of annual global carbon emissions. It has one of the world's lowest rates of per capita energy consumption given its large population. The average Indian consumes 25% of the energy consumed by an average Chinese and 7 to 8% of the energy consumed by an average American. To bridge these gaps, our reliance on fossil fuels, and therefore our rate of carbon emissions, is only going to increase. Renewables are going to be a part of the solution, of course, but it is highly unlikely that India will become a 100% renewable energy powered country in the next 10-15 years.